I stood on the front porch, adjusting the pale blue wool scarf Mom had knitted for my 10th birthday. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the damp, pine-scented air typical of suburban Seattle, trying to anchor myself in the peace I had fought so hard to return to. The wooden door swung open, but instead of my mother's warm, welcoming smile, I was met with the face of my brother, Kendrick. He looked pale, drained of all color, like a man who had seen a ghost. And right behind him, I saw my mother. She was on her knees on the cold hardwood floor. My duffel bag slid from my shoulder and hit the concrete with a heavy thud. My chest tightened instantly, as if a coil of barbed wire were being cinched around my ribs. The air stuck in my throat. In that split second, the disciplined, orderly world of a commanding officer crumbled inside me. Mom did not look up. She was trembling, using the hem of her worn-out apron to frantically wipe mud from the stiletto heel of a stranger standing above her. "Faster, you useless old thing," the woman hissed, her arms crossed, eyes filled with absolute contempt. Kendrick just stood there, head bowed, silent as a sinner. "I am Major Celia Olson." I had just returned from the hell of a combat zone seeking peace, only to realize that true hell wasn't in the desert. It was right here, in my mother's house. Why was the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for her children living like a slave? I stepped past Kendrick as if he were nothing more than an empty sandbag. The air inside did not smell of the pecan pie or lavender essential oils Mom used to love. Instead, it reeked of industrial bleach, the sterile, chemical sting of a field hospital. My mother, Ruth, scrambled to her feet. She quickly hid her hands behind her back. Even in the dim light, I could see they were red, cracked, and swollen. She looked at me, and her eyes held no joy of reunion, only sheer terror. "Celia," she stammered, her voice thin and brittle. "Why didn't you call the house? I haven't finished cleaning." Her eyes darted toward the woman, Camille, with the flinch of a dog expecting to be kicked. Camille didn't even grant me the courtesy of eye contact. She stepped over the wet spot Mom had just scrubbed, her heels hammering a sharp, aggressive rhythm against the expensive timber floor. "Kendrick," she said, her eyes glued to the screen of her iPhone 15 Pro Max. "Ask her where my silk blouse is. I need it for the gala tonight." Kendrick, the little brother I'd once taught to tie his shoelaces, shrank into himself. He couldn't meet my gaze. I'll tell Mom to find it right away, babe." In this luxurious living room, illuminated by the artificial glow of a modern gas fireplace, my mother looked like a displaced ghost. Her clothes were so old they hung off her skeletal frame like rags on a wire hanger. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological torture. Camille sat at the head of the long mahogany table, casually complaining about the stupid VIP clients at her high-end fashion boutique who didn't understand the value of Italian leather. Kendrick nodded along, laughing on cue, a hollow, pathetic sound. And Mom? Mom didn't have a chair. She stood by the kitchen island, clutching a shaker of sea salt and a pepper grinder, waiting, watching, ready to sprint if Camille so much as twitched a finger. I pulled out the empty chair next to me. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, silencing the room. "Mom," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "Sit down, eat." The air in the room froze. Camille stopped chewing. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin and smirked. A look of pure toxicity. "Oh, Major," she drawled, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "We have rules here. Ruth prefers to stand. It helps with her digestion, doesn't it, Ruth?" My mother looked at the floor, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She nodded, a jerky, broken motion. Yes, Celia. It's better for me." I gripped my steak knife so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. My instinct screamed at me to flip the table, to shatter the crystal wine glasses and the facade of this perfect suburban life. But the officer in me took control. Assess, analyze, act. If I exploded now, the hostage, my mother, would pay the price later. I stood up, tossing my napkin onto my untouched plate. "I'm not staying here," I said. The tone was not a request. It was a declaration. Kendrick let out a breath of relief, the exhale of a coward who thought he had escaped confrontation. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. But as I passed Camille, I leaned down. I put my lips close to her ear, close enough that she could feel the heat of my suppressed rage. "Enjoy your dinner," I whispered, my voice low and sharp as a razor blade. "Because it might be the last good meal you taste for a very long time." I saw the shiver run down her spine. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out into the cold Seattle night, crossing the street not to the airport, but to the Motel 6 directly opposite the house. I tossed my bag on the cheap bed and moved to the window. I pulled the curtains back just an inch. From here, I had a direct line of sight into the kitchen window. Mission status changed. This was no longer a homecoming. This was a reconnaissance operation, and I would not leave until the target was neutralized. The room at the Motel 6 smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon cleaner, a stark contrast to the sterile, hospital-scented prison across the street. I did not sleep. Sleep is a luxury for civilians. For a soldier in enemy territory, sleep is a liability. I sat in a plastic chair pulled right up to the window, the curtains drawn just enough to accommodate the lens of my military-grade binoculars. My breath fogged up the cold glass. Outside, the Seattle mist was thick, clinging to the street lamps like a shroud, the temperature hovering near freezing. 4 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen light in Kendrick's house flickered on. Through the magnified lens, the scene was crystal clear, and it tore through my composure. Mom was not sleeping in the guest room. She wasn't even on the couch. I watched, my grip tightening on the binoculars, as she rolled up a thin, foam camping mattress she'd laid out on the tiled floor of the pantry. She looked like a refugee in her own son's home. She didn't start her day with a moment of peace or a hot tea. Instead, she moved to the laundry sink. She plunged her hands into the water. Even from here, I knew the water was ice cold. She began to scrub a pile of delicate, colorful silk garments, Camille's blouses. I remembered Camille's voice from dinner. The machine ruins the fibers, Ruth. So, my 65-year-old mother was hand-washing them at 4 in the morning. I zoomed in. Her hands, once soft and warm when she tucked me in as a child, were now raw, swollen, and red, resembling old, knotted ginger roots. She rubbed her knuckles to get warmth back into them, then went right back to scrubbing. 7 o'clock in the morning. The prince and princess awoke. I watched Camille descend the stairs in a silk robe that probably cost more than Mom's Social Security check. She sat at her vanity table near the window, her face twisted in a permanent scowl. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I could read the body language, and the volume was loud enough to penetrate the double-paned windows. "Where is my coffee?" she screamed. "It has to be sugar-free almond milk, you senile old woman." Mom rushed into the frame, balancing a steaming mug. In her haste, the toe of her worn slipper caught the edge of the expensive Persian rug. She stumbled. She didn't fall, but the mug tilted. A small splash of beige liquid sloshed onto the saucer. Camille's reaction was immediate and feral. She stood up and swiped her hand outward, knocking the hot mug straight into my mother's chest. "Useless!" The words seemed to vibrate through the air. "Are you trying to burn me?" I gasped, my own hand flying to my mouth. But Mom didn't check her burned skin. She didn't cry out in pain. Her first instinct, trained by months of abuse, was to grab the hem of her shirt and frantically wipe the few drops of coffee that had landed on Camille's slipper. She was apologizing. She was begging for forgiveness for being burned. 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Kendrick's BMW pulled into the driveway. He was home for lunch, probably to grab files. I watched him walk into the kitchen. Mom was standing in the corner, eating. She was holding a styrofoam cup of instant noodles, the cheap kind, sodium-rich and nutritionally dead. The noodles looked soggy, swollen from sitting too long. On the kitchen island, right next to where Kendrick put his keys, sat a large cardboard box. A leftover seafood pizza from last night. Half of it was still untouched. Any decent human being, let alone a son, would offer a slice. Instead, Kendrick picked up the box. He looked at Mom, then looked at the pizza. He didn't offer it. He walked to the trash compactor and shoved the entire half pizza inside. I could almost hear his excuse as he gestured to the bin. "Make sure you take the trash out before Camille gets home. She hates the smell of old seafood." He walked past his mother as if she were a broken appliance, a piece of furniture that had outlived its warranty. The nausea that hit me wasn't from hunger. It was from the realization that Kendrick's cowardice was far more repulsive than Camille's cruelty. He had sold his soul for a quiet life, paying for his comfort with his mother's dignity. 9 o'clock in the evening. The house went dark, save for the porch light. The back door creaked open. Mom stepped out into the freezing night air, hugging her thin cardigan around her fragile shoulders. She sat on the cold concrete steps of the back patio. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular object. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars. It was a photograph. An old, creased snapshot of our family from 20 years ago. Dad was still alive, standing tall and proud. Kendrick was just a teenager. I was in my first uniform. We looked happy. Mom traced the face of my father with her thumb. Her shoulders began to shake. She was crying. But she didn't make a sound. She pressed her hand firmly over her mouth, stifling the sobs, terrifyingly conditioned to be invisible, to be silent, so she wouldn't disturb the sleep of her masters upstairs. It is heartbreaking to watch someone you love suffer in silence, isn't it? If you believe that every mother deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, please take a moment to tap the like button and comment, "Respect," below. Let's show that we stand with Ruth. I lowered the binoculars. The plastic casing was wet with my own tears. In the Bible, there is a commandment my mother recited to us every Sunday: honor thy father and thy mother. Looking at that house, I realized Camille and Kendrick weren't just being mean. They were desecrating that commandment. They were spitting on it. The image of my mother, alone in the cold, silencing her own grief to serve her abusers, snapped the final tether of my restraint. The surveillance log was closed. The evidence was undeniable. I stood up and packed the binoculars away. I was done watching. Tomorrow, I would not be a witness. I would be the consequence. I was in the middle of zipping up my tactical duffel bag, preparing my gear for a confrontation I had planned for the next morning. Then the sound tore through the quiet suburban street. It was the unmistakable, violent crash of heavy metal hitting ceramic tile. It came from across the street. I grabbed the binoculars. Through the lens, the kitchen was a scene of chaotic misery. My mother had been on her feet for 18 straight hours. Her body simply gave out. She had been lifting a heavy stockpot of boiling chicken noodle soup from the stove, and her grip had failed. The pot hit the floor. A cloud of scalding steam erupted, instantly fogging the window. But what happened next made my blood run cold. Camille did not rush to see if my mother was burned. She did not check for injuries. She lunged forward like a rabid animal. She grabbed my mother by the shoulders and slapped her. It was a vicious, open-handed strike that snapped my mother's head back. Mom lost her balance on the slick, soup-covered floor and fell backward. Her head cracked against the corner of the massive stainless steel refrigerator. She slumped to the floor and did not get up. Kendrick was standing right there. He froze. He just watched, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides as his wife assaulted the woman who gave him life. I don't remember leaving the motel room. I don't remember crossing the asphalt road. My world narrowed down to a singular tunnel of red-hot focus. I reached the back door of their house. It was locked. I didn't bother knocking. I stepped back, pivoted on my left foot, and unleashed a military-grade breaching kick, driving the heel of my combat boot directly beside the deadbolt. Crack! The wood frame splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The door flew open, slamming against the interior wall, vibrating the entire house. I stepped into the kitchen, bringing the freezing night air and a storm of violence with me. Kendrick screamed, jumping back against the counter. Camille spun around, her face draining of all color as she saw me. I ignored them both. I dropped to my knees beside Mom. She was groaning, clutching the back of her head. I pulled her hand away gently. Blood. Bright red arterial blood was matting her gray hair. You broke my door!" Camille shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling with indignation. "Get out of my house." I stood up slowly. I turned to face her. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I spoke with the deadly, quiet calm of an officer who has decided the enemy's fate. "If you speak again," I said, my voice low, "I will not be responsible for what happens to you." Camille opened her mouth to argue. I closed the distance between us in 2 strides. I invaded her personal space, forcing her back against the sink. I leaned in, my face inches from hers, my eyes locking onto hers with the intensity of a sniper scope. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered. "If you ever touch her again, if you even look at her the wrong way, I will come back. And I will break every single finger on the hand you used to hit her. That is not a threat, Camille. That is a promise from a major in the United States Army." She stopped breathing. Her eyes went wide with genuine primal fear. She realized that her money, her status, and her arrogance meant absolutely nothing in the face of raw, disciplined violence. I turned my head to Kendrick. He was shaking, pressing himself into the cabinetry. "And you," I said, looking at him with zero emotion. "You stood there? You watched her bleed?" "Celia, he stammered. "You're dead," I cut him off. "The brother I knew is dead. You are just a stranger to me now." I turned back to Mom. I helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed. We are leaving, Mom. Get your purse. We are going right now. Mom looked around, confused and terrified. The conditioning of her abuse ran deep. Her eyes darted to the spilled soup on the floor. But, Celia, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dinner. I ruined dinner. Who is going to clean this up? Camille will be so angry. I squeezed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. There is no more Camille, I said firmly. I am here. Your shift in this hellhole is over. You are relieved of duty, Mom. I guided her out the shattered back door, past the stunned silence of the two monsters she had served for free. A taxi I had summoned on the run was already idling at the curb. I helped Mom into the back seat, wrapping my jacket around her shivering shoulders. As the car pulled away, leaving the beautiful rotting house behind, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my banking app, but it wasn't a standard alert. It was a message from the Defense Finance and Accounting Service regarding my allotment history. I opened the file. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. The physical abuse was horrific, yes, but what I saw on that screen made my stomach turn. The numbers didn't lie. While my mother was eating garbage and scrubbing floors, a fortune had been moving through her name. We hadn't just escaped a prison, we had just uncovered a crime scene. The VIP lounge at SeaTac International Airport was quiet, a sterile sanctuary of soft jazz and the low hum of expensive espresso machines. My mother, Ruth, was curled up on a leather sofa in the corner. She was fast asleep, her small fragile body lost in the oversized fabric. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her hands still twitching slightly in her sleep, as if she were still scrubbing invisible stains from a silk blouse. I sat opposite her, my military-issued laptop open on the coffee table. The blue light of the screen illuminated the dark circles under my eyes. I plugged in my card reader and navigated to the MyPay portal, the secure site where the Department of Defense manages military payroll. For the last 6 years, every single month, I had set up a discretionary allotment. It was a direct transfer of $2,000 from my combat pay, sent automatically to a joint account I had opened for Mom before I deployed. I wanted her to be safe. I wanted her to have independence. I did the math in my head before the page loaded. $2,000 a month, 72 months. That was a principal sum of $144,000. That is enough money to buy a small condo in a quiet town. It is enough to hire a full-time housekeeper. It is enough to ensure that an elderly woman never has to wash clothes in freezing water at 4 a.m. The page loaded. My eyes scanned down to the allotment history and the current balance of the receiving account. My heart stopped. The air left my lungs. $12.50. I stared at the number, blinking, waiting for it to change. It didn't. $144,000 was gone. Vanished. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, sickening rage that started in my gut and spread to my fingertips. I clicked on the transaction history. I needed to know where the blood money went. I needed to see what my sweat, my sacrifice, and my absence had purchased. It wasn't spent on arthritis medication. It wasn't spent on organic groceries or heating bills for my mother. The transfers were systematic. Every month, within hours of my deposit hitting the account, the funds were swept into another account. Kendrick and Camille Olson. Joint checking. I scrolled through their spending log, and each line item felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Lease payment. BMW Financial Services, $800. Emerald City Golf Club, monthly dues, $300. La Mer Spa and Skincare, $500. Gucci. Bellevue Square, $2,500. I looked at my mother sleeping on the couch. I thought about the instant noodles she ate for lunch. I thought about the trash she scavenged from. I bled in the sand of Afghanistan for this. I missed my daughter's first steps for this. I lived in shipping containers and dodged IEDs so that my sister-in-law could drive a luxury SUV and get $500 facials, while my mother was treated like a stray dog in the basement. They didn't just steal my money. They stole my mother's dignity. They stole her golden years. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over Kendrick's name. I didn't hesitate. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was groggy, thick with sleep, but laced with a pathetic panic. Celia, where are you? Where is Mom? He stammered. Camille is freaking out. She has a brunch tomorrow and nobody ironed her linen pants. Shut up, I said. My voice was lower than a whisper, colder than the grave. What? Celia, listen, you need to bring her back. I'm looking at the bank statements, Kendrick, I interrupted, cutting him down mid-sentence. $144,000. The line went dead silent. I could hear his breathing hitch, the silence of a guilty man caught holding the smoking gun. Celia. Wait, he finally choked out, his voice trembling. I can explain. We just borrowed it. Temporarily. You know how it is, the real estate market is tough, and Camille, she needs to maintain a certain image for her career. We were going to pay it back. We just needed to look successful, to become successful. Image? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. You let our mother eat garbage so your wife could carry a Gucci bag. You let her scrub floors on her knees so you could play golf? It's not like that. We provided her a room. We gave her a roof over her head. You gave her a cell, I snapped. Listen to me and listen well. I just got off the phone with the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. I have canceled the allotment, but I didn't stop there. I called the fraud department at USAA. I reported unauthorized access and theft of funds targeting a vulnerable senior citizen. Celia, no, you can't. His voice cracked into a high-pitched whine. They'll freeze everything. They already have, I said, glancing at the confirmation email on my screen. Your joint account is locked pending a federal investigation. That BMW in the driveway? The repo man will be coming for it. The club membership? Cancelled. That house you can't afford? Start packing. You're ruining us, he screamed. We are family. How can you do this to your own brother? I looked at the phone, then at my mother, whose cracked hands were clutching the edge of a blanket in her sleep. I don't have a brother, I said. My brother died a long time ago. You are just a parasite. And I just cut off the host. Good luck with the real world, Kendrick. I ended the call. I didn't just put the phone down. I popped the back case off. I removed the SIM card, the little chip that held the number they used to call me, to guilt me, to manipulate me. I snapped the plastic in half. I walked over to the trash can near the buffet line and dropped the broken pieces into the bin. I walked back to the couch and gently placed a hand on Mom's shoulder. She stirred, blinking her eyes open, looking up at me with that habitual fear. It's okay, Mom, I said softly, closing the laptop. The bad dream is over. We are going home. Kendrick was gone. Seattle was behind us. But as I looked at the departure board for Virginia, I knew the war wasn't over. It was just moving to a new front. We arrived in Virginia under a slate gray sky, but inside my house, everything was bright, curated, and suffocatingly perfect. Savannah met us at the door. She wore the practiced, welcoming smile of a model military spouse, her hair perfectly blown out, her outfit coordinated with the season. She hugged Mom, but I felt the hesitation, a split-second pause where she assessed the worn-out clothes and the smell of travel that clung to us. Our home in Alexandria was a masterpiece of interior design. It was the kind of house that belonged in a magazine spread. White walls, beige accents, and everything arranged by color and texture. It was beautiful. And for my mother, it was terrifying. Daisy, my 5-year-old daughter, was the only burst of genuine, unfiltered joy. She squealed and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's legs. But Mom didn't relax. She stood stiffly in the entryway, clutching her battered handbag like a shield. When we moved to the living room, Mom hesitated. She looked at the sofa, a pristine, cream-colored linen sectional that Savannah treated like a holy relic. Mom looked at her own pants, which were faded and slightly stained from the flight, and then she backed away. She didn't sit. She found a corner near the wall and stood there, her hands nervously smoothing her shirt, her eyes darting around the room looking for a chore to do. It was the reflex of a caged animal that had been released, but still felt the bars. She believed she had to work to exist. 2 weeks passed, and the relief of the rescue began to curdle into a silent, grinding tension. Mom's trauma did not disappear just because the zip code had changed. In fact, her survival habits began to clash violently with Savannah's obsession for order. It started at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would wake up to the sound of soft scrubbing. Mom would be down in the kitchen, washing the hardwood floors on her hands and knees before the sun came up. She did it because she thought she had to earn her keep. But to Savannah, it was a nuisance. Celia, I can't sleep, Savannah whispered one morning, her voice tight with irritation. Why is she cleaning a clean floor? It's unnerving. She moves around the house like a ghost. Then came the food. I found little Ziploc bags hidden in the back of Mom's nightstand drawer. Half-eaten biscuits, a few grapes, a slice of cheese wrapped in a napkin. She was hoarding food, terrified that the fridge might be locked again. But Savannah didn't see the tragedy. She only saw the mess. We have ants, Celia. Savannah announced one evening, slamming a drawer shut. Ants in the guest room because your mother is stashing trash in the furniture. I can't find my spice jars because she rearranges them every day. I know she has been through a lot, but she is driving me crazy. The breaking point was not an explosion, but a sigh. It was a Tuesday evening. We were in the living room. Mom was eating a cracker, trying to make herself small on the edge of a wooden chair. She still refused the sofa. Her hand trembled slightly, and a few crumbs fell onto the expensive Persian rug. It was nothing. A few specks of dust. But Savannah let out a sigh. It was a long, loud, theatrical exhale of exhaustion. She didn't say a word. She just stood up, marched to the utility closet, and grabbed the Dyson vacuum. She turned it on right next to Mom's feet. The sudden roar of the machine in the quiet room sounded like a weapon engaging. Mom flinched violently. She dropped the cracker, her hands flying up to cover her face, her body curling inward. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with panic. She wasn't seeing Savannah cleaning a rug. She was seeing Camille about to strike. She started mumbling, I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Savannah rolled her eyes, shouting over the noise of the vacuum. "Oh my God, Ruth, relax! It's just a vacuum. I told you to eat at the table." I shut the vacuum off. The silence that followed was ringing in my ears. Mom was trembling, wiping invisible tears from her cheeks. Later that night, in our bedroom, I tried to bridge the gap. "Savannah, please," I said, keeping my voice low. "She has PTSD, loud noises, sudden movements. She thinks you're going to hit her. You have to be patient." Savannah was sitting at her vanity, aggressively removing her makeup. She spun around to face me, and I saw the stress etched into her features. She wasn't evil, but she was civilian. She didn't understand that safety is a feeling, not just a location. "I have limits too, Celia," she snapped. "I am working on 3 major design projects. I need peace in my own home. I can't walk on eggshells every time I turn on an appliance. I want my space back." "She is my mother," I said, feeling a wall rising between us. "She has nowhere else to go." Savannah stood up, her face flushed with frustration. She looked me in the eye and delivered the words that severed the last thread of my hope. "Look, I love you, and I feel bad for her. But this is our house, Celia. It is not a refugee camp." She turned off the light and got into bed, turning her back to me. I stood in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. I realized then that I had extracted Mom from the war zone, but I hadn't brought her to safety. I had just brought her to a different kind of battlefield, one where she was an unwanted burden, an unsightly stain on a perfect white canvas. And for the first time, I felt completely alone in the marriage I thought was my sanctuary. That fateful Tuesday afternoon, I clocked out early from the Pentagon. The traffic on Interstate 395 was surprisingly light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe tonight I could cook dinner. Maybe we could sit down, me, Savannah, Mom, and Daisy, and actually function like a family. I unlocked the front door, expecting the silence of the suburbs. Instead, I walked into a wall of noise. It was a sound that made my stomach turn over, shouting, high-pitched, aggressive, furious shouting. I dropped my keys and ran into the living room. The scene before me froze in time, etched into my memory like a combat photograph. My mother was on her knees. She was scrambling on the floor, her hands trembling violently as she tried to pick up the jagged shards of blue and white porcelain. It was the Ming vase, an antique reproduction Savannah had bought at an estate sale for $2,000. She treated that vase like a child. Now it was in pieces. But I didn't care about the vase. I stared at the floor. A drop of bright red blood fell from my mother's finger and landed on the pristine, snow-white wool carpet. Then another drop, and another. She had cut herself on the sharp ceramic. She was bleeding. Standing over her was Savannah, my wife, the woman I loved. Her hands were planted on her hips, her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She wasn't helping Mom. She was screaming at her. "What is wrong with you?" Savannah yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I told you 1,000 times not to touch my decor. Are you deaf? Or are you just senile?" Senile. The word hung in the air. And then, the world shifted. It happened in slow motion. My vision tunneled. The edges of the room blurred into darkness. I looked at Savannah, but I didn't see my wife. Her face distorted, morphing into the sneering, contemptuous face of Camille. The expensive Virginia living room dissolved into the cold, bleach-scented kitchen in Seattle. Mom was on her knees. Mom was bleeding. Mom was terrified. The enemy had breached the perimeter. Threat level, critical. My rational brain, the part of me that was a loving partner and a mother, shut down. The soldier took over. The alpha wolf protecting the wounded pack member surged forward. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I moved. I crossed the room in 2 strides. I shoved Savannah away from my mother. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a tactical maneuver to clear the threat. Savannah stumbled back, shock registering in her eyes. "Celia," she started to say, but the adrenaline was already in my veins. My arm moved before my mind could stop it. Crack. The sound of my open palm striking Savannah's cheek was sickeningly loud. It sounded like a dry branch snapping in a winter forest. Savannah fell back onto the cream-colored sofa, clutching her face. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. "No!" Mom screamed from the floor, reaching out to grab my pant leg with her bloody hand. "Celia, don't. Please!" From the top of the stairs, a high-pitched wail shattered the moment. "Mama hit Mommy!" I looked up. Daisy was standing there, clutching her teddy bear, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me not with love, but with fear. I looked down at my own hand. It was stinging. It was trembling uncontrollably. I had used the same hand that swore to defend the Constitution, the same hand that held my daughter, to strike my wife. I felt sick. I wanted to vomit. "Celia," Savannah whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. I'm sorry. I was just so angry about the vase. I didn't mean to yell." I looked at her. I saw the regret. But then I looked at my mother, cowering on the floor, wiping blood onto her old pants, terrified of causing more trouble. The regret in my chest hardened into ice. "You yelled at her," I said. My voice was unrecognizable, hollow, metallic. "You made her bleed. You stood over her while she was on her knees." "It was an accident," Savannah sobbed. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "It wasn't. You sounded just like them. You sounded just like Camille." "Don't say that," Savannah cried, reaching for me. I stepped back. I couldn't let her touch me. Not now. The line had been crossed. The house was compromised. "Pack your things, Mom," I commanded, my voice flat. "Just the essentials. We are leaving." "Celia, stop," Savannah pleaded, standing up. "Where are you going? You can't just leave. We can talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," I said, lifting Mom to her feet. I didn't look at the broken vase. I didn't look at the white carpet stained with my mother's blood. I promised her she would never be hurt again. I failed. I won't fail twice. This is the hardest choice a person can ever make. Celia is torn between the love for her wife and the duty to protect her mother. Violence is never the answer, but the instinct to protect a parent is powerful. If you were in Celia's boots, who would you choose? Your spouse or your mother? Please take a second to hit that like button and comment Team Mom or Team Wife below. I want to know what you would do. I grabbed my duffel bag, the one I hadn't fully unpacked since Seattle. I guided Mom out the front door, into the biting Virginia wind. Behind me, I heard Savannah sobbing my name. I heard Daisy crying for her mama. Every sound was a knife in my heart. But I didn't turn around. I put Mom in the car, got in the driver's seat, and drove away into the dark, leaving the perfect house and my shattered marriage in the rearview mirror. I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in a brick walk-up in Old Town Alexandria. It was 20 miles away from the pristine, color-coded prison I used to call home. There were no Ming vases here. There were no cream-colored linen sofas that cost more than a used car. The furniture was basic, functional, and sturdy. This was our new fortress. For the first week, I ran our lives with the strict discipline of a boot camp, but for a different purpose. We didn't wake up to work. We woke up to breathe. We ate meals at set times. We took long walks along the Potomac River every afternoon, watching the gray water flow by. I cut off all contact with Savannah. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't listen to her voicemails. This wasn't just to protect Mom. It was a self-imposed punishment. I had crossed a line I promised never to cross. I had used violence against the woman I loved. The silence of my phone was the penance I paid for that slap. But in this quiet simplicity, something miraculous began to happen. Without the judgmental gaze of Savannah, without the constant fear of leaving a crumb or making a noise, Mom began to thaw. The hoarding stopped first. I no longer found half-eaten biscuits wrapped in napkins hidden in her drawers. She realized that the refrigerator was hers, too. She realized that hunger was no longer a threat. Then, the cooking returned. Not as a chore, not as a frantic attempt to avoid punishment, but as an act of love. One Tuesday afternoon, I unlocked the door and was hit by a scent that instantly transported me back to my childhood in the South. It was the rich, warm smell of toasted pecans, brown sugar, and melting butter. Mom was in the tiny galley kitchen, humming a hymn to herself. She was making her signature pecan pie. She looked up when I entered, her face flushed from the heat of the oven. "I thought we could use a treat, Celia," she said. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't apologizing for using the oven. Later that evening, we sat on the cheap sofa, watching reruns of The Golden Girls on the cable TV. Mom laughed. It was a rusty, creaky sound at first, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. But then it grew louder. She laughed at a joke, her head thrown back, completely unself-conscious. She wasn't looking over her shoulder to see if someone would mute the volume. She was reclaiming her humanity, one laugh at a time. But while Mom was healing, I was bleeding internally. The nights were the hardest. After Mom went to bed, the silence of the apartment would press down on me like a physical weight. I would lie on the lumpy couch, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, and the ghost of my old life would haunt me. I missed Savannah. I missed the smell of her shampoo. I missed the way she would curl her feet under my legs while we read. And Daisy. God, the ache for my daughter was a physical pain in my chest. I wondered if she was asking for me. I wondered if she was still scared of Mama. I felt like a villain in my own story. I had destroyed my marriage. I had traumatized my child. Was I too harsh? Was I too cruel? Then I would stand up and walk softly to the bedroom door. I would crack it open just an inch. I would see Mom sleeping deeply, her breathing steady, her face relaxed for the first time in decades. She wasn't flinching in her sleep. She wasn't curled in a ball on a kitchen floor. I would close the door and lean my forehead against the wood. There is a military philosophy. Sometimes you have to burn the village to save it. It's a brutal, ugly truth. I had burned down my marriage to save my mother. It was a terrible price, but looking at her peace, I knew I would pay it again. The price of her safety was my solitude, and I accepted that. 3 weeks passed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the Virginia sky had opened up, pouring rain in relentless gray sheets against the window pane. The doorbell rang. I stiffened. I wasn't expecting anyone. My hand instinctively went to the defensive posture I learned in basic training. I moved to the door and looked through the peephole. My breath hitched in my throat. It was Savannah. But it wasn't the Savannah I left. It wasn't the polished, perfect interior designer with the blowout hair and the designer trench coat. She was standing in the rain without an umbrella. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, hasty bun, strands of wet hair plastering to her face. She wore a simple sweatshirt and jeans. She looked tired. She looked dark around the eyes. She looked broken. And in her hands, she wasn't holding a lawyer's envelope. She wasn't holding divorce papers. She was clutching a tin box. A familiar, slightly dented tin box that we used to keep in the pantry. I opened the door. Savannah looked up at me. Water dripped from her nose. She didn't say anything at first. She just held out the tin. "Daisy made these," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Chocolate chip, with extra walnuts. She said Grandma Ruth needs them because Grandma Ruth is sad." She stood there, shivering slightly in the cold hallway. She didn't demand to come in. She didn't shout. She just waited, holding out a box of cookies like a white flag of surrender on a battlefield I thought would never end. I opened the door wider, letting the cold, damp air of the hallway mix with the warmth of the apartment. Savannah stood there, her trench coat soaked through, holding that tin of cookies like it was a peace offering to a hostile nation. She didn't say a word at first. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, stripped of all the artifice and perfection she usually wore like armor. Then her knees seemed to give way. She didn't fall, she sank. She collapsed right there on the welcome mat, heedless of the dirt, heedless of her designer jeans. "I am so sorry," she sobbed, the words tearing out of her throat. "I have been so selfish, Celia. I looked in the mirror today, and I didn't see myself. I saw someone cold. I saw someone cruel. I became the exact person I hate." The sight of my strong, proud wife on her knees broke the last remnant of my anger. The wall of ice I'd built around my heart shattered. I dropped my guard. I dropped my soldier persona. I knelt down into the wet fabric of her coat and pulled her into my arms. "I am sorry, too," I whispered into her wet hair. "I should never have raised my hand to you. Violence is never the answer, Savannah." I let the war inside my head hurt the person I love most. I am so sorry. We held each other there in the doorway, two imperfect people trying to bridge a gap that had grown too wide. Then, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. Mom stepped out of the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. She saw Savannah kneeling on the floor, crying. A lesser woman might have felt vindicated. A lesser woman might have stood back and enjoyed the sight of her tormentor in pain. But my mother is not a lesser woman. She walked past me. She reached down with those thin, work-worn hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors and been burned by coffee. And she cupped Savannah's face. "Oh, child," Mom said softly. "Get up off that floor. You'll catch your death of cold." Savannah looked up, flinching slightly, expecting a reprimand. "Ruth, the vase? I was so horrible to you." "Hush now," Mom said, pulling Savannah into a hug that swallowed her whole. "It was just a vase. It was just clay and paint. You can't hug a vase, Savannah, but you can hug family. And we are family." Savannah buried her face in Mom's shoulder and wept harder, the loud heaving sobs of someone receiving a grace they know they don't deserve. In that moment, I saw the arrogance of the interior designer vanish, replaced by the humility of a daughter-in-law who finally understood the value of the woman she had dismissed. Suddenly, the heavy atmosphere was punctured by a shriek of pure joy. "Grandma!" Daisy shot out of the car parked at the curb, sprinting up the walkway like a little missile in rain boots. She squeezed past me and launched herself at Mom's legs. "I missed you. I missed your singing," Daisy yelled, burying her face in Mom's apron. The apartment, which had felt so quiet and lonely for 3 weeks, was suddenly filled with noise, chaos, and life. We moved to the small second-hand dining table. It was a tight squeeze, but nobody cared. We ate the chocolate chip cookies Daisy had baked. They were slightly burnt on the bottom and had too many walnuts, but they tasted better than any gourmet pastry from a French bakery. As the rain lashed against the window, we made a treaty. "We will come home," I told Savannah, holding her hand across the table. But things change. The house is not a museum anymore. Mom lives there. She sits on the sofa. She cooks when she wants. And if a crumb falls on the floor, we pick it up. We don't bring out the vacuum cleaner like a weapon. Savannah nodded vigorously, wiping a smudge of chocolate from her cheek. "I promise. No more white carpets. I'll replace them with hardwood. I want a home, Celia, not a showroom." For the first time in a long time, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. The war on the home front was ending. We were rebuilding, not with expensive decor, but with understanding. But peace, I learned long ago, is often just the intermission between battles. My phone rang. It sat on the counter, buzzing angrily, vibrating against the laminate surface. I frowned. It was late. I picked it up and looked at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code sent a chill down my spine. 206. Seattle. I answered, my voice dropping back into a professional cadence. "Major Olson speaking." "Major Olson," a man's voice replied, crisp and urgent. "This is attorney David Sterling calling from Seattle. I represent the bank handling the foreclosure of a property at 42 Oak Creek Drive, Kendrick's address." "I am listening," I said, signaling for the room to be quiet. "I am calling because your brother, Mr. Kendrick Olson, listed you as his emergency contact," the lawyer continued. "I thought you should know the situation. His wife Camille filed for divorce 3 days ago, but before she left, she emptied their joint accounts. She took everything, Major. The house is being seized by the bank tomorrow morning." "Where is my brother?" I asked. "He was evicted an hour ago," the lawyer said. "He has no money, no vehicle, the BMW was repossessed, and nowhere to go. He is currently sitting on the curb outside the property. He asked me to call you. He said he has no one else." I looked at my mother, who was laughing with Daisy, unaware that her other child was currently sitting in the gutter of his own making. "Thank you for the information," I said. I hung up the phone. The warmth of the cookies faded from my tongue. The prodigal son had fallen. And now, he was looking for a way home. 1 week after the lawyer's call, a ghost arrived at our doorstep in Virginia. He didn't pull up in the pearl-white BMW X5 that he used to wash every Sunday while ignoring his mother. He didn't arrive wearing an Italian silk suit or a Rolex watch. He arrived on foot, walking from the nearest Greyhound bus station 3 miles away, dragging a torn duffel bag that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster. I watched him through the window before I opened the door. Kendrick looked 20 years older. His face was gaunt, covered in patchy, unkempt stubble. His clothes were wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame, smelling faintly of diesel fumes and unwashed despair. When I opened the door, he didn't even try to stand tall. He collapsed. He fell to his knees on the concrete porch, right where Savannah had knelt just days before. But this was different. This wasn't the humility of a wife who made a mistake. This was the total destruction of a man who had lost his soul. "Celia," he croaked, his voice cracking from dehydration. "She took it all. Camille. She took the accounts. She took the car. I have nothing. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Please, help me." Mom stood behind me, her hand covering her mouth to stifle a gasp. She was seeing her baby boy reduced to a beggar. I looked down at him. A week ago, I would have felt rage. Now, I just felt a cold, clinical pity. I looked at him like I would look at a soldier who had deserted his post and come crawling back when the enemy overran his position. "You deserve this," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "You chose her, Kendrick. You chose the lifestyle. You chose the image. You let Mom eat scraps so you could play the big shot. And now that the money is gone, and the wife is gone, suddenly you remember you have a family?" He sobbed, his head bowing until his forehead touched the dirty welcome mat. I know I'm garbage, just don't turn me away." I began to close the door. "I'm not running a shelter for parasites." "Celia." Mom's hand clamped onto my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I looked at her. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her jaw was set. "He is your brother," she whispered fiercely. "He is my son. We do not leave our wounded behind. You taught me that." I looked at Mom, then back at the shivering heap of a man on the porch. I took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs. "Get up!" I barked. It was my command voice, the voice that made privates at basic training freeze. Kendrick scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Listen to me," I said, stepping out onto the porch to face him. "Mom says you stay, so you stay. But the free ride? That ended in Seattle. You want to be a man? Then you are going to learn what that word actually means." "I'll do anything," he stammered. "I'll clean the house. No." I cut him off. "You won't be touching a vacuum. I made a call this morning to an old contact of mine. He runs a logistics supply depot near the Quantico base. They need loaders. It is back-breaking work. Lifting 50-pound crates for 10 hours a day, minimum wage, no air conditioning." Kendrick's eyes widened. He had never done a day of manual labor in his life. "You start tomorrow at 0600, I continued, relentless. "And you aren't sleeping in my guest room. There is a cheap efficiency motel down the highway that rents by the week. You will live there, you will walk to work, and every Friday when you get your paycheck, you will bring me $200. "200, he asked, blinking. "Restitution," I said. "You stole $144,000 from this woman. You're going to pay it back. Dollar by dollar, sweat by sweat. If you miss one payment, if you miss one shift, if you complain one time, you're out. Forever. Do we have a deal?" He looked at me, terrified. Then he looked at Mom. He nodded slowly. "Deal." The next 6 months were a brutal transformation. I didn't make it easy on him. I didn't drive him to work when it rained. I didn't invite him over for steak dinners. I let him rot in that cheap motel room, eating bologna sandwiches and drinking gas station coffee. I watched from a distance as the logistics depot broke him down. The first week, he could barely walk. His soft, manicured hands blistered and bled. He lost 20 pounds of soft, suburban fat. But something else happened. The blisters turned into calluses. The fat turned into lean muscle. He stopped looking at the ground when he spoke. One Friday evening in late November, Kendrick came to the apartment. He didn't look like a beggar anymore. He wore steel-toed boots and a flannel shirt stained with grease and dust. He smelled of hard work and honest sweat. He walked into the kitchen where Mom and I were sitting. He didn't ask for food. He pulled a white envelope from his back pocket and placed it on the table in front of Mom. $200, he said. His voice was deeper, steadier. And an extra 50 for the groceries. He looked at me. There was no resentment in his eyes, only a quiet, hard-earned respect. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Same time," I said, suppressing a smile. He turned and walked out into the night to catch the bus back to his motel. I watched him go. The parasite was dead. In his place, a man was finally beginning to grow. Christmas Eve in Virginia arrived wrapped in a blanket of silence and snow. Outside, the world was painted in shades of white and gray, the snowflakes drifting down in lazy spirals to coat the driveway and the roof of our townhouse. But inside, the air was alive with warmth and color. The living room, once a showroom of beige neutrality, had been transformed. A massive Douglas fir tree stood in the corner, its tip brushing the crown molding, heavy with ornaments that told the story of a family, not a color scheme. There were macaroni stars Daisy had made in preschool hanging right next to crystal baubles. The fireplace, no longer a decorative afterthought, crackled with a real wood fire, casting a golden, dancing light across the room. The house smelled incredible. It didn't smell like bleach or fear anymore. It smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, cinnamon sticks, and baked apples. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. My mother was sitting in the armchair, the comfortable one, right by the fire. She was wearing a brand new cable knit sweater in a vibrant shade of cardinal red. It was the first bright color I'd seen her wear in a decade. She was holding a cup of hot cocoa, and she was laughing. Daisy was sitting on the rug at her feet, trying to teach her grandmother how to play a video game on a tablet. "No, Grandma, you have to swipe up to make the penguin jump," Daisy giggled. "I am swiping, sweetie, I am swiping." Mom laughed, her face flushed with warmth and happiness. Savannah walked past me carrying a bowl of cranberry sauce. She paused and kissed my cheek. "Table is set, Major. Just waiting on our guest." She smiled. It was a real smile. The tension, the walking on eggshells, was gone. We had rebuilt our home, not on the foundation of perfection, but on the foundation of acceptance. Then, the doorbell rang. The laughter in the room didn't stop, but heads turned. I walked to the door. I took a breath, remembering the last time a family member had arrived at this door. Broken, dirty, and desperate. I opened it. Kendrick stood on the porch, framed by the falling snow. The transformation was absolute. The man standing before me was not the cowering boy from Seattle, nor was he the broken beggar from 6 months ago. He was wearing a pair of dark denim jeans and a simple, red and black plaid flannel shirt. It was inexpensive, likely bought at a discount store, but it was clean, pressed, and tucked in. His hair was cut short and neat. His face was clean-shaven, revealing a jawline that had hardened with resolve. He wasn't hunched over. He stood with his shoulders back, his spine straight, the posture of a man who earns his sleep after a long day of hard labor. In his hands, he held a large bouquet wrapped in brown paper. White lilies, Mom's favorite. "Merry Christmas, Celia," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. He looked me in the eye, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing to hide. "Merry Christmas, Kendrick," I said, stepping aside. "Come in out of the cold." He stepped inside, shaking the snow from his boots on the mat. When he walked into the living room, Mom gasped. She stood up, setting her cocoa down. "Kendrick," she whispered. He walked over to her. He didn't fall to his knees this time. He stood tall and held out the flowers. "For you, Mom," he said softly. "I paid for them. With my own money. From the overtime shift." Mom took the flowers, burying her face in the white petals to hide her tears. Kendrick wrapped his arms around her, hugging her gently. It wasn't the desperate cling of a child needing a mother, it was the embrace of a man protecting one. Dinner was a masterpiece. We sat around the table, Savannah, me, Mom, Kendrick, and Daisy. The turkey was golden brown, the mashed potatoes were steaming, and the wine was poured. I watched Kendrick. In Seattle, he would have waited for Mom to serve him. He would have complained if the wine wasn't chilled to the perfect degree. Tonight, he picked up the carving knife and fork. He sliced the most tender, succulent piece of white meat from the breast. He didn't put it on his own plate. He placed it gently onto Mom's plate. "Eat up, Mom," he said. "You look great in red." He looked around the table, then raised his glass of water. He was driving, so he refused the wine. "I want to say something," he began, his voice thickening with emotion. "I know sorry is just a word. I said it a million times before. But for the last 6 months, every box I lifted, every drop of sweat, I was thinking about you, Mom. And you, Celia. I was a boy when I had money. I had to lose everything to become a man. Thank you for not giving up on me." Savannah wiped a tear from her eye and raised her wine glass. "To family," she said. "Broken, glued back together, and stronger than before." "To family," we all echoed. The sound of crystal glasses clinking together rang out like a church bell. Late that night, after the gifts were opened and the house had quieted down, I stepped out onto the front porch. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world covered in a pristine, glittering blanket of white. I held a mug of mulled wine in my hands, letting the heat seep into my palms. I looked up at the stars, visible now through the clearing clouds. For so long, I had defined my life by the mission. Identify the threat, neutralize the enemy, protect the asset. I had applied that logic to my own family. I saw Camille as the insurgent, Kendrick as the collaborator, and Mom as the hostage. I was right to fight. I was right to breach the door. But as I stood there in the silence, I realized that the greatest victory of a soldier isn't the battle itself. It isn't the adrenaline of the rescue or the satisfaction of punishment. The greatest victory is standing down. It is watching your mother laugh without fear. It is watching your brother stand tall with dignity. It is watching your wife create a home that welcomes the messy, imperfect reality of life. Discipline had been the skeleton that held us upright when we were broken. But love, messy, complicated, patient, and forgiving love, was the flesh and blood that made us live again. I took a sip of the warm, spiced wine and smiled into the darkness. The hostile territory was gone. The perimeter was secure. Mission accomplished, I whispered to the night. I turned around, opened the door, and, looking back at this operation, I realized that my toughest battle wasn't fighting enemies abroad, but fighting for the soul of my own family. I learned that true strength isn't just about protecting the people you love from harm. It is about giving them the grace to heal. We often treat our aging parents as obligations, forgetting that they are the architects of our lives. Honoring them is not a burden. It is a privilege. And for anyone out there dealing with a Kendrick in their life, remember this. Accountability is love. Sometimes you have to let someone hit rock bottom so they can find the solid ground to stand up again. Never give up on the power of redemption. Now I want to turn the mic over to you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your peace or your family? Or perhaps you have a story of forgiveness that changed a life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might inspire someone else who is struggling today. If you enjoyed this journey with the Olson family, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. From my home to yours, I wish you a happy new year filled with health, reconciliation, and endless love. Dismissed.